Good morning. It is 11:49 a.m. on Sunday, April 16th, 2017. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. My name is Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So today, being Sunday, is the day for the continuation of the rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender with Season 2, Episode 14, City of Walls and Secrets. Super creepy! Super creepy episode. One thing that I'll clear up just right up front because I had actually forgotten the details of this, and I think it's one of the rare examples of a bit of world building detail that's not really made all that clear within the show, which is that you could be forgiven for thinking that when the kids are trying to get to see the Earth King here in Ba Sing Se, that's Bumi. But Bumi is king of Omashu, which, despite being in the Earth Kingdom and him being called king, is apparently a completely different guy, a completely different position. He's king only of Omashu, just the city, and not the whole Earth Kingdom. Omashu being kind of like a separate little city-state within the larger Earth Kingdom. But see, all of that's never really gone into detail. I, in fact, looked it up on the wiki. So if anyone was confused about that, that's the answer. And I think, like I said, by and large, the world building of this show is really amazing. But every so often, there's something that kind of slips through the cracks a little bit. They don't explain, but it's fine. So in any case, though, the kids are finally inside the walls, the inner walls of Ba Sing Se. And it's interesting because we could be forgiven for assuming that the walls that we protected last time against the drill were the city walls and that it was city inside. But in fact, no, it is in fact a much, much larger outer wall that protects all the farmland and everything that surrounds the inner city. And then the inner city itself uh, is enormous. But then, as we discover, to Aang's dismay, to Toph's frustrated resignation, the city of Omashu, or excuse me, the city of Ba Sing Se, has a very rigid class structure enforced by walls, even within the actual city itself, where all the poor people are kept separate from everybody else. Craftsmen who work with their hands. And it's interesting the progression of how sinister this place seems to be increases because on the one hand, as soon as they arrive at the station, they meet Judy, lady with the unnaturally large smile, who handles them, as Toph describes. And it's interesting too to have Toph be the word, the voice of reason right up front of warning them. The city's not going to be like what you think. And so, first, our first question is like, okay, how did they know? They knew everybody in the party well enough to have someone there to meet them and greet them all by name, given the chaotic way that they made their way into the city. Okay, I take that back. Now that I think about it, it's still a little weird, but then again, they did just check in and help with a big battle at the outer walls. So it seems plausible that word of their presence would have been traveled inwards, certainly when we see how effective the Dai Li are. But certainly it's still a little bit unsettling, especially given the way Judy intends to accompany them everywhere they go, but all portrayed as though she's being helpful. She's giving them a tour. She will escort them anywhere they need to go. And surely you wouldn't want her to leave you alone. What kind of host would she be? And yet, as we see them escorted around on this tour, it's made very clear people won't talk to them because with her there, she's telling them, no, don't talk about whatever the kids are asking about. And we gradually learn that there's this rule about you can't talk about the war, which is really very strange. It's city making rigid control, and it's still left somewhat of a mystery what the plans are of these people in the inner city. But it seems clear, if nothing else, that their priority more than anything else is to protect the rigid class structure of the city, even to the point where potentially people in the outer circle would be killed in unnecessary fighting at the so the idea that you know they care more about protecting their society than they do about winning the war, which is, perhaps that's their own blind spot, right? I mean, we get the feeling definitely that there's a lot more going on here than we know so far. But to be sure, Aang is still looking for Appa, and is somewhat dismaying at the size of the city, and the fact that they're escorted everywhere, no one will talk to them, is making that very difficult. In the meantime, we have the little story of Jet's pursuit of Iroh and Zuko, determination to catch them firebending, to have proof so that he can do something. And see, that's the part that's ill-defined. And even his friends, Longshot and Smellerby, are worried about him. They're saying, and without going into it, like, we can sort of read between the lines to understand why the rest of the group's not with them. The idea that they're coming here to make a fresh start because things seems like they went bad where they were. And this idea of making a fresh start, and they're saying, well, you can't just, like, you're going to get everybody in trouble, and what is it that you even hope to accomplish? But Jet is obsessed at this point. Not merely with the idea of fighting firebenders, but especially the idea that people would be secretly firebenders in the city. Just can't trust them. They're up to no good. And so he just can't let it go. And we see Zuko and Iroh ending up in a very modest housing situation. They're going to be working at a tea shop. There's discussion of it being temporary, but it's also not clear what their larger plans are. After all, meeting with the White Lotus allowed them, safe passage to the city here, where they're reasonably safe from being pursued from the Fire Nation, but what's the next step? It's not clear for them. And yet, after it seems clear that they're being much more careful to not be spotted. They probably understand that even though there are a few who would pursue them as doggedly as Azula or Jet say, it's still probably a bad idea to let anybody know that they're firebenders. And so we see, even when they don't realize they're being observed, they're taking steps to, borrow spark rocks rather than use firebending, even just for a second. Which is very frustrating to Jet, of course, because he knows, and he's right, that they are firebenders. But ultimately, it's kind of portrayed as sad. It's interesting because we know Jet's right, of course, and we don't want him to capture Iroh and Zuko at this point, I don't think. But at the same time, it's interesting that kind of the emotional arc of the episode, of that portion of it, is really not on Zuko and Iroh. It's on Jet and Jet's friends and their sadness that they see Jet's obsession leading him to trouble, and they don't know what to do, how to stop it. And so sure enough, when Jet gets frustrated, he just attacks. But Zuko defends himself without using firebending, and the whole thing plays out. It just looks like Zuko or Jet just attacked them for no reason, and he's arrested. And just to finish off that little line of plot, what we see at the end seems to be a really creepy, sinister hypnotist using a lamp on a rotating track to hold him prisoner and hypnotize him. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. That's super creepy, so we'll see what happens there. But in the meantime, we have, Aang and the kids are determined, well, we're not going to get anywhere trying to talk with Judy, and the idea that they won't be able to see the king for 6 to 8 weeks obviously is a non-starter given the urgency of their timeline. And so when they discover they're not going to have any luck trying to look for Appa, they decide at least they're going to try to get this information to the king. Going to sneak into the big party. And there's a funny little bit of them observing how weird it is that he just has a pet bear. Not a platypus bear, not a skunk bear, not a porcupine bear, just a bear? Weird. uh, in terms of other hybrid animals, we also see a really interesting owl cat thing, but also one of the less impressive hybrids. We see sparrowkeets at this pet store, which just look like birds, pretty much. I guess maybe if I knew more about birds and understood the subtle nuances of the anatomy between a sparrow and a parakeet, I would understand the hybrid more, but yeah, sparrowkeet rolls off the tongue, though. In any case, this big party is an opportunity to potentially sneak in, but then there's discussion of manners. And it's a lot of good world building, just the idea of really selling this idea that this party is this very high society event. And you can't just crash it. Not only is there security, but also like there's expectations, and you will attract attention if you don't act the right way. And it all ties into Toph's current, arc. Like her sort of story here is that she deliberately fled that kind of society. So she knows about it, but really doesn't enjoy it. And so she basically just gives up as a lost cause the idea of teaching Aang and Sokka to try to pass as society gentlemen. But Katara, at least, maybe. But it's interesting, too, as they try to sneak in, that the attempt to find, the guard won't buy even Toph's passport, which is a neat trick because we had previously seen the scene, passport lady being so impressed by it, and so the idea that the guard is not impressed and insists on an invitation tells us something, right? And then it turns out, just by sheer dumb luck, that the random guy that they say, hey, let's go ask that guy if he'll bring us in, turns out, oh no, he's actually the head of this secret security service. Whoops. And he toys with them by, bringing them in, but basically just observing them to see what they're going to do. We have a classic bit played for humor of Aang and Sokka trying to decide on a plan, and we'll disguise Momo as a ghost, and he'll fly by, create a distraction. But then, of course, they just dress as busboys. And so a lot of this is really just all kind of world building of establishing the city and what its nature is. The idea of its rigid class structure, hierarchy of, poor people on the outside, and then sort of a middle class, and then the upper society. And then discovering, once the kids are taken into custody by the Dai Ling, and who have these really awesome rock gloves that they wear, that they're able to send out and grab people with this glove at a distance because they're using earthbending, of course. And that's just a really cool look. And again, that's one of the strengths of this show, is that they just come up with so many really cool and interesting, varied ways to use bending in cool ways. And so the black gloves being actually a means to grab people at a distance, restrain people, and so on, but brings them into the little circle. And then we discover that this urgency to see the king is maybe kind of moot, because the king himself, is he even really the person really in power when it comes to this stuff? This guy we meet certainly seems to suggest that he's not. And yet, even as he tells them, I'm actually the one in charge, he still shuts them down, which is mysterious, right? Because we understand the importance of what the kids are trying to say, and yet the guy who's actually in charge is still insistent on saying, no, the rules that we've set, not allowed to mention the war inside the city, that takes priority. No, I won't let you see the king, and basically implies that he knows where Appa is now, or at least could find out, and would interfere in Aang's ability to find Appa if the kids continue to persist in their pursuit here. So and then of course the last moment of the episode is really kind of extra unsettling. We've had this gradual progression of the city getting, not only just seeming vaguely like, oh, it's disappointing that there's this really rigid class structure to it and that sort of thing. And then the idea of a rigid society, but then it starts getting more and more creepy, more and more sinister. And then at the same time that we're cutting back and forth with Jet being hypnotized, we discover Judy, who had been escorting them through the city, sees them at the party and seems very upset. And then, of course, when the kids are finished having met with the Dai Li, we have Judy approach them, who's clearly a different person. Still introducing herself as Judy, acting the same way, the same mannerisms, that same creepy smile. So not only are we left to say, that other Judy who failed to keep them out of the party, what happened to her? Disappeared, perhaps. And yet also they seem to have some way of mass producing Judys. So that's super creepy and very unsettling, and it's hard to know exactly what the kids should do from here on, because this is a great act 2 for the season, because we've got to this point where the kids now have a bit of crucial information that's necessary for the series arc. And for the longest time it seemed just so obvious. It's like, oh, we know how to defeat the Fire Nation army. It just needs to be an orchestrated attack on this day. We just need to tell the people in charge. And now it turns out that that's not merely complicated, but perhaps impossible, because they don't actually want to hear it. And so now they're stuck in a position of, can they leave? Probably they're not allowed to leave. They don't have Appa. Their information is proving to have zero short-term value. There's probably not going to be room to do a lot of earthbending training around here. So they're kind of stuck. What can happen? What's going on here? And where are things going to go for the remainder of the season? And it's a great kind of twist and defiance of our expectation, especially given our previous experience with an Earth Kingdom city in Omashu was a very different sort of thing. It was much kind of sillier, and Bumi was turned out to be Aang's friend, and all of that stuff, and even as that city fell and Bumi was taken prisoner, it was a very different thing, and it set us up for a different expectation for this city. And so now, what's going to happen? We don't know. And in the meantime, we have Zuko and Iroh pretending to just work at a tea shop. What are they going to do? What's their next step? A lot of stuff in the air right now for Avatar: The Last Airbender. So we'll see what happens next week for episode 15. And in the meantime, I will talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes.